Welcome, my dear viewers. Many of the videos or lectures I prepare for you, like this one today, are the result of my private research because simply, as you may guess, I'm a person who is extremely passionate about history and I dig into it as much as I can. And today I will present to you the results of my inquiries regarding Iran. Because, of course, we are observing what is happening in the world, and perhaps many of you are asking yourselves what is really going on with Iran and what is so amazing about this country. Digging into the topic of Iran, I found so many interesting facts that I want to make a whole lecture about it for you, so that you can hear what I managed to discover through my hours of research. Therefore, in this episode, I will present you the entire history of Iran from antiquity to modern times, whole 5000 years, with particularly emphasis on these very significant historical changes that made Iran what it is today. And it's a truly incredible amount of things happening there. It may seem that such a mountainous country, after all, the Zagros Mountains reach 4,400 meters above sea level, could not be a theater of population and civilizational shifts as, for example, Poland, which lies on the European plain where armies constantly moved from east to west and back. However, in Iran, there was also incredible melting pot and historical events that virtually shaped the entire globe took place here. So, it will be about the ancient civilizations occupying the territories of today's Iran, about how Persia was formed, that political ethnicity to which Iranians love to refer, calling themselves the Persians, and whether they have any grounds at all to trace their continuity from the Persians. It will be about how Islam conquered these lands and why Iranians are Shiites, meaning they are completely different Muslims than the rest. I will talk about where these divisions come from and how it happened that Iran is the most and particularly the only one fully Shiite country in the Muslim world. Finally, I will talk about the Mongols and the Tamerlan who conquered these lands, and later I will move to the modern foundations of the Iranian state. Let's begin the history of Iran. As early as 3000 BCE, the ancient kingdom of Elam existed in the territory of modern Iran. It was one of the first civilizations in the world. For a long time, they neighbored the Babylonians, but because they did not have as developed writing system as the Babylonians, there isn't as much data about the kingdom of Elam as there is about ancient Mesopotamia. Despite this, they left behind, for example, the magnificent ziggurat of Koglazanbil, which was built around 1250 BCE. The Elamites were an indigenous people of these lands, dating back to Neolithic farmers. They originated here and they were neither Semitic people like the Babylonians, for example, nor they were Indo-European people like later Medes and Persians. The Elamites invaded Babylonia and Babylonia invaded the Elamites. And so, over hundreds of years, one of such great Elamite invasion managed to defeat even Babylon and take huge loot. And it was precisely in the Elamite territory in Susa where the famous code of Hammurabi was found, having been carried off by them during this invasion. Later, the Indo-European Medes and Persians entered the scene. They arrived from the north and occupied the areas of today's northern Iran at the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. And the appearance of Indo-Europeans on the stage greatly changed the situations because now we have three powerful players. In 8th century we have the powerful Assyrian state in the west, which covers particularly the entire Fertile Crescent, including Mesopotamia. We have the already much weaker state of Elamites, and we have the Medes. The Medes meaning Indo-European nomads who arrived in this area relatively late, only in the middle of 2nd millennium BC, and initially did not form a single consolidated state organism, but were tribes feuding with each other, often fighting among themselves and being mercilessly invaded by the Assyrians. Above all, the Assyrians formed the great empire in the history of the world, and they treated such fragmented Medes as easy prey. They raided and abducted them. But this ended toward the late 7th century, where the Medes were united by their first historical king. He reformed the Median army and allied with Babylon, which has rebelled against Assyria. In 712 BC, an incredibly significant event took place. The combined army of Babylonia and Medes captured the Assyrian capital city, Nineveh. And after collapse of Nineveh, the great Assyrian empire, based on slavery and exploitation, quickly fell, and the Medes became a power in the territory of today's Iran, gradually expanding their influence farther south into the former Elamite kingdom. But in the south there was other Indo-European tribe, namely Persians, and they rebelled against the Medes and against their hegemony in 6th century BC, and their commander was famous Cyrus the Great. He defeated the Medes but did not destroy them. Instead, he incorporated them into his kingdom. He conducted a very wise assimilation policy toward Medes, as well as toward other subsequently conquered provinces. After defeating Astyages, king of Medes, Cyrus became a powerful ruler in the region, and he united present-day Iran, which deeply troubled king of Lydia, Croesus, located in present-day Turkey. He declared war on Cyrus to prevent the rise of some superpower in the region, but Cyrus took up the challenge and faced him in the furious battle. This battle remained unsolved, and Croesus thought that with such significant losses Cyrus will give up on the quest and withdraw to his country for a winter. Meanwhile, Cyrus immediately regrouped his army and set off in pursuit of Croesus, and the great decisive battle took place, in which it seems that Lydian cavalry would wipe out Cyrus' infantry. However, he used a very interesting trick here. He put all his camels on the front of his army and then ordered them to charge. And Lydian cavalry, mainly horses, seeing these furious camels, were terrified and they started to flee in panic. And this is how the Cyrus army won the battle against Croesus and conquered Lydia. The great, rich, magnificent kingdom of Lydia was incorporated into Cyrus' territory. Next, he attacked east, defeated tribes there, and expanded his territory by a huge swaths of present Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. He captured such famous cities like Sogodia or Bactria, But the most important thing for Cyrus was, of course, the capture of Babylon, which he accomplished in 539 BC. And in this way, he created a largest empire that existed on earth up to that time, the Persian Empire. And the Persians, it's worth noticing, are Indo-European people. And now I will tell you very interesting thing I discovered during my research, because as you look on the map, we see Iran in the Sea of Islam that spilled over Asia and reaches from Afghanistan to Morocco in Africa. And everywhere you see Islam. Meanwhile, the Iranians are actually particularly not related to Arabs at all. It is amazing that to this day, a quarter of inhabitants of Iran have the R1 haplogroup similar to Europeans. The majority is R1A like Eastern Europeans. There are some Irans with RIB. The remaining 50% of the population is haplogroup G or J2, meaning these are still ancient farmers, Neolithic farmers, that are preserved here for thousands of years. And the only 10% have haplogroup J1, meaning they are genetically Arabs. And finally, Cyrus decided to conquer other Indo-European nation, namely the Scythians. But he did not succeed with them. In 530, he struck north against the Scythian queen Tomiris, and he thought that since he had particularly conquered the whole world, the Scythians will be easy to conquer, and his territories in the north will simply reach as far as no one before. But the Scythian queen managed to defeat Cyrus in battle and killed him. And in this truly warrior-like way, Cyrus passed away, but the Persian Empire will still be lasting for another 200 years. The Persian Empire had a great cultural impact on all of Central Asia. However, the most important factor that the Persians brought with them is religion, particularly forgotten today, Zoroastrianism. It is really very interesting religion that lives on to this day, although no one is aware of it. Zoroastrianism is a religion originated from the beginnings of Indo-European existence in these territories of Iran. Its old hymns, the Gets, are written in very similar language to the Indian Vedas, which make up the Rigveda, created 2000 BCE. So it's very indigenous Indo-European religion, and the Persian Empire, despite having a multitude of religions, had Zoroastrianism as the most important religion that spread over vast territories at the time and heavily influenced Judaism and thus later Christianity. And among other things, from Zoroastrianism we have the concept of the battle between good and evil, which was borrowed by Judaism. We also have the concept that after death, either heaven or hell awaits a person. Because, for example, in this religion, there was something like if someone dies, their soul crosses a bridge where it's judged based on all their thoughts, words, and deeds. And the righteous go to the house of song, meaning paradise, and the wicked go to the house of lies, meaning the place of torment. And Christianity practically copied this concept one-to-one. Zoroastrianism had also resurrection and the last judgment, or rather, it's also invented it, and it was later borrowed by the religious driven from Judaism. So you see, the Persian contribution to the culture of the world is huge, but today 99% of people are simply unaware that these elements are just taken from this old Indo-European Medes and Persian religion created in the Persian Empire, because it seems as today, of course, that all is invented by Christianity. But despite this wonderful culture, the Persian Empire, as you know, fell. I believe that Alexander the Great is the greatest military commander in history of the world, because what he achieved in his extremely short life. So Alexander, in lightning fast campaign, destroyed the entire Persian Empire, and the era of Hellenization of this area began. Even though Alexander died, control over Iran remained in the hands of the Greeks and Macedonians. Seleucidos, one of his great generals, took power, creating the Seleucid dynasty, and they would rule over this area for practically 100 years. However, unlike Alexander, who tried to incorporate Persian culture elements into the empire, the Seleucids were decidedly more pro-Greek. They did not want to use the Persian language. They removed Persians from higher administrative positions and tried to create a purely Greek empire, which of course the Persians didn't like. And this area of ancient Persia, the Persian cradle, was in constant tension with Seleucid capital, which was initially on the Tigris River in Seleucia and later moved farther west to Antiochia. And that is also why the Seleucids did not maintain power for too long, as rebellions began in these Indo-European provinces. Bactria rebelled first against the Seleucids in 250 BC, but the most important element that led to the collapse of this state was a massive invasion by other Indo-European people, the Parthians. The Parthians, under the leadership of their magnificent king Arsaces, entered the territory of modern-day Iran, defeated the Seleucids, and began to build their state here, which grew significantly over time. A great Parthian empire was formed, which its size would probably match Persia in size, if not Rome in the west, which the Parthians were unable to defeat. But on the other hand, Rome also had huge problems fighting the Parthians, and this border between the Roman world and the world of Indo-European Parthians was drawn in the territory of Mesopotamia. This was the area of friction between these two empires, but the Romans could not even dream of crossing the line of the Zagros Mountains. The Parthians, however, created a state that was not centralized. It was sometimes a rather loose federation of tribes and kingdoms, which, if Parthian ruler was strong, were loyal, sent troops where needed, and everything was fine. But if there were problems with the succession of power, or the ruler was weak, internal wars very often broke out. And of course, there were very many such internal wars in 400 years of history of Parthian kingdom. Even though they dealt with the Romans exceptionally well and were able to stop their expansion to the east, the Romans dreamed of creating a Mesopotamian province, and not even Trajan troops, for example, reached all the way to the Persian Gulf. They never managed to permanently took over this territory. The Parthians dominated here, but despite everything, the most destructive element for them was not the Roman army, but disease. A disease brought by legionnaires besieging Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital. It was brought during the Emperor Antonius in the middle of 2nd century AD. This disease decimated the population of Parthian Empire in the territory of present-day Iran. It incredibly weakened this country, ultimately leading to a rebellion that destroyed the Parthian Empire. And this rebellion emerged from the heart of ancient Persia. That is where the Sassanids, under their king Ardashir, came to the scene. They first rebelled against weakening Parthians, and in 224, in a great battle, they won Parths. And after this battle, Parthian Empire collapsed, and the Sassanids stepped into the place and created a new powerful state. In reality, both linguistically, genetically, and culturally, they were the continuators of the Persian state created 700 years earlier by Cyrus the Great. The Sassanids had a lot of luck when it comes to geopolitics, because the 3rd century AD, when their powerful state was born, was also the time when the Roman Empire was experiencing the crisis of the 3rd century, when about half of 100 emperors and usurpers were constantly fighting each other. The Roman Empire was torn apart by internal conflicts, plunged into great political chaos and massive economical recession. And all this meant that the son of the founder of the Sassanid Empire, Ardashir, whose name was Shapur, was easily able to defeat 3 Roman emperors and even took one of them as prisoner. And this was the first time in the entire history of Roman Empire that an emperor became a slave of foreign ruler. This emperor was Valerian. This situation demonstrated the fall of Rome and the power of Sassanids on the other side. Because the Sassanids originated from the heart of Persia, they also strongly relived the Persian religion, Zoroastrianism, which I talked about earlier. But it wasn't exactly like in Persia, when Cyrus the Great was a very tolerant ruler. Sassanid rulers wanted Zoroastrianism to become the state religion, and other religions were persecuted. And of course, the main persecution was Christianity, because it was Roman religion. Now, during the Sassanid era, Christians were persecuted, but over time this changed, and when the golden age of Sassanid Empire arrived in 6th century, the Sassanids actually became a bust of relative religious tolerance and enlightenment. In 6th century, this was in contrast to the Byzantine Empire under, for example, Justinian the Great, where religious persecutions was colossal. Not only other Christians were persecuted, but also the Jews and anyone who dared to believe in something else than Orthodox Christianity. And at this time, Sassanids were open-minded, and many thinkers, philosophers and teachers from Byzantium fled to the Sassanid court in Ctesiphon. The Sassanids got very lucky for a second time. Namely, in 602, the Byzantine Empire was murdered by the usurper Phocas. Usurper was ruling brutally, and the Byzantine Empire was in great chaos. The empire was very weak at this time. on the other hand, the powerful Sassanids started a very long, bloody war against Byzantium. And during this war, they made the greatest conquests of their history. They captured, among other places, Jerusalem, Egypt, and large parts of Asia Minor. The Sassanid empires expanded very heavily in the west into territories where Sassanids had never been before, and now, thanks to the weakness of Byzantium, they were able to conquer these vast areas. But fortunately for Byzantium and for the doom of Sassanids, Heraclius came to power in Byzantium in 610. Heraclius gathered all the available Byzantine army and threw himself at the Sassanids. Even though Constantinople was quickly besieged by the Avars and Slavs in 626, Heraclius did not turn back from the east. He pushed to Mesopotamia, and there at Nineveh the most important battle of 7th century took place, where Heraclius defeated the Sassanids. And after this battle, he was able to take back these old territories that Sassanids took from them: Syria, Asia Minor, Jerusalem, and Egypt. But after this war, both great empires were very, very weakened, and a lot of blood was spilled. And suddenly, from the Arabian Peninsula, great eruptions began. The eruption of Arab tribes with their new religion, the Islam. At the beginning, both the Sassanids and the Byzantines underestimated the Arabs, but subsequent battles against them were very bloody, and despite that, the Arabs, having small, less armed, less trained units, won one after another. Here we have, of course, at the head of these Arab armies, the great leader Khalid ibn al-Walid, one of the greatest commanders of all time, who exactly achieved these great victories. And as a result, these two very weakened empires were defeated in incredibly short time by newcomers from the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabs, as a result of these conquests, in a very short time, merely 50 years, created a great empire which its area was superb to even Roman Empire on the greatest extent. The Umayyad Caliphate at the beginning of 8th century will occupy territories from Morocco and Spain in the west all the way to Pakistan in the east, and from the Caucasus Mountains in the north to the south of Arabian Peninsula in the south. Immense territories, and all united by one faith in Allah. And this situation will shape the history of Middle East for the next 100 years, basically up to today. But this is also the moment when the Islam split into two versions, the Sunnites and Shiites. The Sunnites, meaning the majority of Muslims who recognized the authority of first Umayyad caliphs, and they named their as rightful heirs of Allah and the chosen one. But the others, the Shiites, were the one who believed that the Umayyad caliph are not pure enough to rule the Islam. They were arguing that Ali is the rightful heir of Muhammad, and that his family is the one that could lead Islam. And this divination on Shiite and Sunnite Arabs, Muslims in fact, is up to today, and Iran is the most Shiite country all over from all Muslim countries in the world. However, despite this initial success, Caliphate will suffer several very significant defeats in the middle of 8th century. These will be defeats in wars at three different theaters, thousands of kilometers away one of another. However, all of these combined defeats will lead to the Umayyad Caliphate collapse. I mean, of course, the Battle of Poitiers in France, where the invasion on Europe was repelled by the Charles de Martel. Second was the famous defense of Constantinople in 717 against great Umayyad army. And the third was defeat on the Great Steppe north of Caucasus Mountains, when they tried to export Islam beyond these mountains and Khazars were able to defend their territories. And finally, Umayyad Caliphate fall after 740 AD, and in 750 new dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, arise and came to power. But after these events, Islam was never again united as during Umayyad reign. But in the history of Iran, practically not much will change, because the Abbasids will incorporate Iran into their great caliphate and Iran will continue to be under Islamic rule. But this Iranian Islam will always be slightly different. It will be Shiite Islam, which will always distinguish them from neighboring people and will also be an important element of their national identification. Even though in 9th century Iran was under the power of Abbasids, this suzerainty was largely only nominal, and Iran, being very strong culturally, conducted its own politics and above all had its own culture. And though they were subordinate to the caliphs of Abbasid dynasty, Iran itself local Persian dynasties ruled. Persians developed at this time also new Persian language, which is basis for today's Persian as well. At that time, a very important national epic of the Persians was also created, which is entitled Shahnameh, meaning the Book of Kings, which tells about these pre-Islamic times, the magnificent Persian rulers. Iran became the center of world's science, culture, and of course it was very rich country. But as a rich country, it became a tasty piece of land for invaders from the east and from the north. And the 10th and 11th century primary was a period when Turkic people began to flow into these areas. And the first such Turkic originated people who invaded Iran were Ghazavids from the Central Asia, and later the Seljuk era began. The Seljuks in the middle 11th century managed to subordinate huge territories of Central Asia and the Middle East. They defeated the Byzantines at the Mazikert in 1071 and created a great empire of the Seljuk Turks by around 1100 AD. But it was an extremely weak empire, not militarily, but culturally and administratively. They were very weak, and in reality it was their Iranian subjects who dictated how to manage an empire, and they rose to very high position in the structures of Seljuk Empire. Likewise, the Persian language developed very nicely at this time and simply became Latin of these times and these areas. And the Turks were culturally very weak, so they also very easily were overwhelmed by Persian culture. The Turks had such a method of management consisting and granting areas to great commanders, and they were to serve in any army at the call of the great sultan who would summon them to the wars. But of course, such system with a weak cultural layer and the management of such extensive, very diverse territory led the Turkish Empire very quickly falling apart into many internal wars and simply divided into smaller principalities, kingdoms managed by warriors, minor kings, warlords, and so on. Besides, the Persian also strongly disliked the Turks for the fact that the Turks adopted Islam in the Sunni version, meaning the most popular one, and they tried to impose their Sunnism on the Persian as well, which of course they very much did not like, because they were Shiites all the time. Finally, at the turn of 12th and 13th centuries, Persia fell under the rule of an empire that arose on the eastern shores of Caspian Sea. They fell under the rule of the powerful Khwarizmian Empire. But this didn't last too long either, because already at the beginning of the 13th century, Khwarezmian was attacked by the Mongols, and in very brutal, bloody military campaign, the cities of Khwarezmian Empire were plundered by the Mongols. This empire was then destroyed and the country fell under the Mongol rule for a few centuries. And next was Iran, which also fell under Mongol rule. But as you know, this great Mongol empire, which spread like a supernova over all Eurasia, didn't last too long. After the death of Mongke Khan in 1259, the Mongol Empire basically fell apart into 5 parts, and the Persian part was managed by the brother of the Khan, Hulagu. And this was the beginning of the genesis of creation of the Ilkhanate in the territory of Persia, which later tried to expand its influence farther west, but did not succeed because they were strong Turks who were able to repel the forces of Ilkhanate, and also Mongols encountered even stronger foe, the Mamelukes from Egypt. However, a great success of Hulagu Khan was the capture of Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Empire. Baghdad was one of the most important cities in the world in 13th century, and it was utterly destroyed by the Mongol invaders. And because of this, the weight of scientific and cultural thought shifted even more to the territory of Iran, where these cities were not so badly destroyed by the Mongols, and gradually the Mongols who ruled in Persia began to transfer to Persian culture. Initially, the Mongols brought Buddhism with them, but they also brought some kind of shamanism, but Mongols at this time were very strongly favoring Christianity because their main enemy were the Muslims, Mamelukes from the Egypt, and they knew that the Christians doesn't like the Mamelukes either. So the rulers of Ilkhanate favored Christians in order to build an alliance with them against the Mamelukes from Egypt. Because Mongols never managed to conquer Egypt, even though they wanted it very much. Finally, Ghazan Khan, the Mongol who now named himself a Shah of Iran, in 1295 converted to Shiite Islam. And this is a moment when the Mongol ruling class, the aristocracy, already very strongly binds himself to Persian culture and religion. And from this time, it's already such an interconnected organism where the Mongols quickly transformed particularly into Persians. The Persians are more happy now that they have rulers who are culturally similar to them, and the Ilkhanate existed, but of course not too long either, because already at the end of the 14th century a great new eruption from the Central Asia took place, because Tamerlane came to power, and Tamerlane tries to recreate Genghis Khan's empire and conquers Iran. The conquest of Iran by Tamerlane was all the easier because of several decades after the fall of Ilkhanate rulers, Iran has been plunged into internal struggles, broken up into minor kingdoms, and by the end of 14th century, Tamerlane managed to subordinate all the Iran without major problems, but he did it in a manner typical for himself, very, very brutally. Tamerlane has the nickname the Sword of Islam. Paradoxically, however, as the Sword of Allah, he mainly murdered Muslims. Let the magnificent Iranian city of Isfahan be an example, which in 1387 surrendered to Timur. His army entered inside, and inhabitants of Isfahan was supposed to pay a great tribute. However, very shortly after, 3,000 soldiers and tax collectors from Timur were murdered in the night by the inhabitants of Isfahan, who did not like this new invader. And the reaction was obvious. Isfahan was wiped out by the vengeful Timur, who in his way showed that rebellion against him is impossible, and generally gave such orders to his soldiers that each unit must deliver a significant number of skulls to him. So they simply hunted for these heads for many days. It is estimated that even 200,000 people were permanently removed from this world in Isfahan alone by Tamerlane. But Tamerlane, however, in his madness saw the power of Iranian culture, and whether he could, he ordered artists, architects, writers, craftsmen, scholars, and painters to be spread. He ordered these people to be spared because he knew that the culture of Iran is priceless. Tamerlane dies in 1405, and his state goes through some chaos, but his son, Shah Rukh, is able to rule over eastern Iran until 1447. Later, however, this state is defeated by the Uzbeks from the north, and Iran is again divided into eastern and western part, and there is so-called time of struggle between black sheep and the white sheep. Until finally, in 1501, a teenage boy named Ismail creates a movement that will be a Persian rebirth and that will lay the foundation for the modern Iran. He will find the Safavid dynasty, and the Safavids will reach for power that will be able to unite all of Iran again in their beloved Shiite Islam. And in this way, a new Iranian state is formed, which is practically the progenitor of what we have there today. The beginnings were quite difficult because for so many years Sunnis had already lived in the territory of Iran in very large numbers. However, the new ruler, Ismail, who was considered a demigod, was very charismatic, and he was ruling with iron fist, but he put a very strong emphasis on Shiism. He wanted to unite all Iranians around this religion. However, for the young Iranian state, the Sunnis in the west, meaning the Ottoman Turkish Empire, were a great threat, and the first clash between Iran and the Turk Turks took place in 1514 when two huge armies met on the battlefield. And here the Iranians, who had great zeal for battle, but technology after these years under Mongol and Tamerlan boot, they were technology very backwards. And on the other hand, we have the Ottoman Turks, who stood at the peak of technology at that time, who had great cannons and had magnificent firearms. They defeated the Iranians in this way without any problems thanks to a great technological advance. And this also gave the Iranians thought that they also must develop technologically. And Iran later, for next 100 years, was constantly an element of global diplomacy. Europeans wanted very often to cooperate with Iran against the Turks, and they sent numerous envoys far to the east. The capital of this state was again Isfahan, already rebuilt after Tamerlan's invasion, and the most important period was the Golden Age during the reign of Shah Abbas the Great. This Shah ruled for 41 years and very much revived former glory of Persia. The Shah took care of the safety of the roads, he built caravan stops, he attracted merchants from both Asia and Europe, he brought into lots of Armenians who built magnificent buildings in his empire. And also he managed to bring the English, who taught them how to produce firearms and artillery. He created a modern army, and thanks to this, he recovered the territories in the north that Iranians lost to Ottomans and to Uzbeks. However, in the 17th century, after the death of Abbas the Great, the government experienced increasing corruption, and this led to ultimate fall of Safavid power in Iran, and the final blow for the Safavids came from Afghanistan. In 1722, the Afghan Pashtuns rose against Iran. They were also Indo-European people, and Pashtuns, who were previously treated as the Highlanders, as the peasants and the shepherds, managed to create a great strong army which simply marched straight to Isfahan, and although it was not able to conquer it because they haven't got artillery, they besieged the capital, and the blockade of the city led to the fall of Persian state, already eaten inside by the corruption, and the Pashtuns went down very bitterly in the history of Iran. They did very bloody purge in Iran, and the more so because they were Sunnis, and here again we have the religious disputes revealed, because of course Iranians were Shiites, so great bloody clashes on a religious basis occurred. Later there was this Napoleon of the East, Nader Shah, who was a military genius. He recaptured many territories in the north and in the west from Turkish and Russian hands. And in 1739 he even invaded India, and he was able to sack Delhi, taking from this city the greatest, world's largest diamond. Unfortunately, toward the end of his life, Nader Shah was a cruel and greedy paranoid, probably simply mentally ill, and was finally murdered by his own soldiers in his tent. And so ended this brilliant, very short-lived Nader Shah's empire. And this is the end of the first part of History of Iran. The next episode will be about 19th and 20th century, and I invite you to listen to it. It will come on YouTube in a few days.